My daughter Sophie spent 5 days preparing an 8-course tasting menu for my father's retirement celebration. 32 guests. A molecular gastronomy concept she'd been researching for months. A chocolate sculpture she'd failed at 4 times before nailing the tempering. That week, she woke at 4:30 every morning to proof sourdough and test flavor combinations. By Thursday evening, our house smelled like fresh basil and seared duck, and the living room looked like we'd hired an event planner. 45 minutes before the guests were expected, my phone buzzed. The message made my stomach drop. I actually decided on Marcelo's downtown. Immediate family only. 4 words. No explanation. No second thought. Sophie didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. Not at first. She just stood beside her chocolate centerpiece, hands trembling slightly, and her breathing went shallow and quick. That's when I understood they weren't going to diminish her the way they'd diminished me for 30 years. Not while I still had breath in my lungs. Not ever again. I stood in our converted sunroom, staring at the 32-place settings Sophie and I had spent 2 evenings perfecting. The menu cards were printed on handmade paper she'd pressed herself, tucked beside linen napkins with origami folds she'd learned from a YouTube video at midnight. There were white orchids everywhere, her idea, because they represent strength and fragility, she'd explained. And now there was nothing but quiet. No conversation. No car doors closing in the driveway, just the soft bubbling of reduction sauce on the stove and the crushing weight pressing against my ribs. Sophie was in our makeshift prep kitchen reorganizing our mise en place for the 4th time, still believing she didn't understand yet. She was listening to Billie Holiday on her earbuds, nodding slightly to the rhythm the way she always did when she was fully immersed. Her chef's coat had a tiny smear of beet puree near the collar, and her face was flushed from standing over the stove for hours. I walked back toward the kitchen, phone burning in my palm. I didn't know what words would make this hurt less. I just knew pretending wasn't an option anymore. "Mom, should I start plating the amuse-bouche now?" she asked, holding up a tray of compressed watermelon cubes topped with feta foam like she'd just discovered something miraculous. I adjusted the balsamic reduction. "It's got more depth now." I forced myself to nod, trying to keep my face neutral. "It looks incredible, honey." My finger hovered over the family group text again. My father's message sat there, cold and dismissive. "We're going to Marcelo's instead." Close family. It wasn't framed as a change of plans, more like a correction of something that had never been real in the first place. I scrolled up and checked the timestamp 6:17. Guests were supposed to arrive at 7. I stepped onto the back porch, pressed my father's contact. It rang 4 times. Finally, a gruff voice. "Yeah, you saw the text," I said quietly, barely a question. "Oh, good," he said, relieved. "Yeah, we're heading to the restaurant now. Your mother's already there with your brother." "Why?" I asked, each word deliberate. "Because Sophie's been cooking for almost a week. Dad, you told us to plan the party here. She's made enough food for 32 people. There was a pause, then a sigh. "Well, tell her not to be dramatic about it. She can use the leftovers for her little cooking experiments or whatever. Your mother and I gotta go. They're bringing out bread." The call ended. I stood there, hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles went white. When I turned around, Sophie was in the doorway. She'd taken out her earbuds. Her expression told me everything. She'd heard enough. Her face didn't collapse. Immediately, first came confusion. A slight tilt of her head like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Then realization. Then something darker. "Wait," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "They're at the restaurant right now." I couldn't make myself answer. The silence did it for me. She stepped forward slowly, took my phone with careful fingers like it might burn her, and opened the thread. There it was. The message, then the photo someone had already posted. My brother's family was already seated at a long table dressed in formal wear. My mother held up a cocktail with a bright smile. My father mid-laugh with a basket of focaccia in front of him. Sophie stared at that photo for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then, without saying anything, she walked back into the prep kitchen, looked at her chocolate sculpture, a geometric masterpiece that had taken her 16 hours across 2 days, and whispered so quietly I almost missed it, "I should just smash it." I shook my head hard. Absolutely not. She stood frozen in front of that sculpture she'd poured her entire soul into, fingers curling and uncurling at her sides like she didn't know whether to destroy it, protect it, or just disappear. I watched her try to breathe normally and fail. Her chest rose and fell too fast, but her expression stayed eerily calm. That kind of numbness, it damages you deeper than any outburst ever could. I took 2 steps toward her. Sophie, I'm okay. She cut me off, voice too bright, too controlled. It's just food anyway, right? Just practice. No, it wasn't just food. It was 5 days of planning. It was the handmade pasta she'd rolled until her shoulders ached. It was the individual dietary accommodations she'd researched obsessively, reaching out to guests directly to ask about allergies and preferences. It was the gluten-free dessert she'd perfected just for my father's colleague who'd mentioned a celiac disease in passing 6 months ago. It was every single, do you think they'll actually like this conversation we'd had over breakfast every morning? That week, I called my mother next. 2 rings. Hello, dear, she answered, cheerful as spring morning. You're really not coming, I said flatly. There was a theatrical sigh. Oh, Claire, please don't make this awkward. We just felt like the restaurant. Would it be easier for everyone? Besides, she continued, we weren't sure about food safety. You know, she's only 18. She's been cooking since she was 9, I said, voice rising despite myself. She's taken food safety courses. She has a whole sanitization system. She wears gloves. She tracks temperatures. She labels everything. Well, it's sweet that she tried, my mother replied with that condescending lilt I knew too well. But it's not the same as professional catering, is it? Not like a real restaurant. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. Then I called my brother Marcus. Not because I thought he'd be different, but because some tiny, foolish part of me hoped he'd at least feel guilty. He didn't. Claire, he said in that smooth, practiced tone he uses in boardrooms, don't guilt trip everyone over this. Sophie's being overdramatic. She's 18. She needs to learn the world doesn't revolve around her. She made food, sure, but we're not obligated to be her taste testers. Taste testers! The phrase hit me like ice water. I hung up without responding. Bat. In the kitchen, Sophie was still trying to maintain composure. She was adjusting the pendant lights over the table like any of it still mattered. Do you think the ambiance is too dim? She asked, voice artificially light. I wanted elegant but not gloomy, you know, like sophisticated but still warm. She glanced at me. My expression must have betrayed everything because her eyes tracked to my hand, still holding my phone. She reached for it before I could react. She scrolled through the thread, saw the new photo my sister-in-law had just posted. My brother's twin daughters, both 16, definitely not children, are already eating their entrees. My mother's hair was professionally styled for the occasion. My father raised a glass of wine to toast something. Her face didn't shatter right away. First, her posture changed, shoulders curving inward, then her jaw tightened. Finally, her whole expression seemed to cave in on itself, like someone had quietly extracted every bit of hope from behind her eyes. She set the phone down on the counter with exaggerated gentleness, like it was made of spun glass. Then she looked at the chocolate. Sculpture again! The sculpture she'd practiced on 6 failed attempts before achieving this one. The one with edible gold leaf she'd applied with tweezers? The one she'd stayed up until 3 in the morning finishing? I really thought, she started. Then her voice broke. I thought they'd at least show up. I moved toward her with open arms, but she stepped backward, shaking her head. And in that single moment, watching my daughter shrink inside her own dream, standing in the kitchen she'd transformed into her sanctuary, I felt something ignite in me that I hadn't felt in decades. Pure, crystallized determination. They weren't just rejecting her cooking, they were erasing her worth. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it anymore. Not this time, not ever again. The prep kitchen smelled like fresh thyme, onions, and something sweet. Probably the honey lavender syrup Sophie had been reducing all afternoon. It should have smelled like victory. Instead, it felt like standing in the ruins of something beautiful. She'd gone silent, organizing her spice containers in alphabetical order, even though they were already perfectly arranged. I wanted to say something healing. I wanted to make it better instantly, but I couldn't lie to her face anymore. So I just stood there watching her fold the same kitchen towel into smaller and smaller squares, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind was clearly miles away. And in that stillness, I was 13 again. My brother Marcus is doing a presentation in the dining room about his science fair project, a volcano that barely worked. My father applauded like he was watching a TED Talk. I sat cross-legged on the floor beside my homemade radio transmitter that could actually pick up stations from 2 counties away. When I tried to demonstrate how I'd modified it to filter static better than store-bought models, my mother said, "That's nice, Claire, but maybe focus on something more ladylike for the school's showcase." Marcus got ribbons and certificates framed. On the wall, I got suggestions to try something else. When he asked for tennis lessons, they bought him a summer membership at the club. When I asked for a metalworking workshop, They said, "We can't afford extras right now." I built a career from it eventually, a modest but successful custom furniture business in Raleigh. My wife does the upholstery. I handle the metalwork and design. It's meaningful work, creative work. We make enough to live well. My parents still call it your little hobby shop. Marcus, meanwhile, has an MBA and 3 failed startups. He drifts from venture to venture like smoke with no fire. When his condo got foreclosed last fall, guess who covered his moving costs? Me? They never acknowledged it. Just said, "We knew you'd handle it." My family treats my reliability like a communal ATM. They treat my daughter like background noise. But Sophie, she's extraordinary. She's everything I could have been if someone had told me my hands were meant for creating, not just for staying clean and folded. She watches cooking competitions like they're documentaries, studies knife techniques with the focus of a martial artist. She once cried because her burr blank broke and she said it lacked soul. I still don't fully understand what she meant, but I love that she cares that much. She doesn't just want to cook, she needs to. It's oxygen for her. Her dream is acceptance into the International Culinary Institute in Boulder. She reads their alumni profiles like poetry. And like me, she's surrounded by people who keep trying to make that dream smaller until it fits inside polite dinner conversation. It's a phase. It's a cute interest. She's too emotional for professional kitchens. But she doesn't shrink. She studies, she experiments, she burns the ganache and starts over. She overseasons the broth and adjusts. She creates space for growth without abandoning her passion. So when she said, "I want to do the entire event myself this year, solo," I was terrified but so incredibly proud. She knew they might dismiss her. She knew they could be cruel. But she tried anyway. She wanted to prove what she was capable of, and they couldn't even be bothered to witness it. Now she stood surrounded by empty chairs, her masterpiece untasted, a silence more devastating than any insult echoing between each carefully folded napkin. They thought they could erase her, but I had been erased before. I refused to watch it happen to her. I don't know what finally broke through my years of trained compliance. Maybe it was the way Sophie whispered, "Let's just throw everything away," like she was trying to delete her own memory before the pain could fossilize. Or maybe it was what arrived 7 minutes later on my phone. Of course it came. Digitally, the way all cowardly things do now, a payment notification. $1,473.18 Marcello's Restaurant. $654. My business credit card. The one I'd used for family emergencies over the years. Car repairs, medical bills, my mother's new furnace, the card they absolutely were not supposed to have access to anymore. They had used my own money to fund the dinner that replaced my daughter's. I stared at that notification, still holding the sourdough bread Sophie had shaped that morning, and I laughed. Not from joy, because if I didn't laugh, I was going to throw something through a window. They hadn't just abandoned her. They'd made me finance my own daughter's humiliation. And they assumed we'd absorb it quietly, like we always had. Not tonight. Not anymore. I called my wife first. "Can you come home immediately?" She heard something in my voice. "Give me 15 minutes. Then I started making other calls. Friends we'd lost touch with over the busy years. Neighbors who still borrowed our lawnmower. My former coworker Jennifer, who once brought her daughter over for a cupcake decorating afternoon. David, my cousin on my mother's side, the outspoken one who got excluded from family events years ago for confronting my parents about their favoritism at Easter dinner. People from our community theater group. A woman I'd only spoken to twice at a farmer's market. I didn't give long explanations. I just told them what happened. My daughter spent 5 days cooking for her grandfather's retirement party. They ditched her at the last minute. There's food for 32 people going to waste. If you can make it, please come. It wasn't an invitation. It was a rallying cry. And to my absolute shock, they answered. By the time my wife pulled into the driveway, the first car was already parking. It was Patricia, from 3 houses down. With her son and a bottle of wine, she said she'd been saving for something special. Then came a couple with their teenage twins from the theater group. Then Jennifer with her daughter and a bouquet of sunflowers still wrapped in grocery store plastic. And then someone I didn't know. Her name was Melissa. She had a professional camera and wore vintage boots covered in paint splatters. "I heard what happened," she said at the door. "I write the weekend food column for the Raleigh Observer. Mind, if I document this, I'd love to feature Sophie's work." I froze, but Sophie appeared from the kitchen doorway. Her eyes were red-rimmed but curious. "Sure," I said. "You should definitely taste everything." Melissa didn't just taste, She took detailed notes, photographed every course, asked Sophie about her techniques and inspiration. She leaned close to me while sampling Sophie's duck confit and whispered, "You know she's more talented than half the chefs I've profiled this year." My throat tightened. "You should tell her that yourself." By the time the fourth wave of people arrived, we had to move the bookshelf into the garage and bring in folding chairs from the basement. Sophie hovered near the kitchen entrance like a startled deer, cheeks burning. "Mom, what is happening?" "I'm saving what you created. Help me set up more seating." She stared at me like I'd completely lost my mind, but she didn't refuse. We pushed 3 tables together in a chaotic line. I reprinted her menu cards on her home printer, and just before she retreated to the kitchen to reheat the second course, I caught her eye and said firmly, "You cooked. They abandoned you. Tonight, we reclaimed this." She blinked twice, processing, then nodded slowly. And the room began to transform. The dining area looked like something between a wedding, reception, and a neighborhood potluck. Mismatched chairs created a patchwork circle. Someone sat on an overturned milk crate, a couple shared the piano bench. The tables were different heights and materials, but Sophie's food, her extraordinary food, unified everything like music. Threading through chaos, she was pacing in the kitchen, muttering to herself about plating temperatures and sauce consistency. "The balsamic reduction might be too thick now," she said, half to herself, completely panicked. "Should I thin it? With stock or just start over?" "You don't have time to start over," I said gently, "and it's perfect as it is." My wife brought her a glass of water and squeezed her shoulder. "Everyone out there came for you," she said quietly. "They want to experience what you made." And they did. All 32 seats were filled. The room hummed with anticipation, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh herbs, roasted garlic, and something turning golden in the oven. Sophie peered around the doorframe like a nervous cat. "Do I just start serving?" I looked at her directly. "You serve your vision exactly as you planned it." She swallowed hard, nodded, and stepped forward with the first course. Compressed watermelon with feta foam and microgreens, drizzled with aged balsamic. The room went quiet. She moved around the tables, placing each plate with shaking but determined hands. When people finally lifted their forks, the murmurs started. "Oh my God, is that mint? This texture is incredible. Wait, an 18-year-old made this?" Melissa, the journalist, was photographing everything silently, her expression one of genuine awe. By the time the main course arrived, butter-poached lobster tail with saffron risotto and crispy prosciutto, the room was electric. People applauded between bites. One woman actually closed her eyes and made a sound of pure pleasure. Then came the moment that shattered me. A man I barely recognized, someone's uncle I think, stood up with his water glass raised. "I don't usually make speeches," he said, "but I have to say something." Everyone quieted. "To Sophie," he said, looking directly at her. "To the young woman who didn't just cook food tonight. She created an experience. She made a feast, not for obligation or recognition, but because she loves this craft with every fiber of her being. And when she was cast aside by people who should have known better, she fed a room full of grateful strangers with more grace, skill, and heart than most professional chefs twice her age could manage." He raised his glass higher. "To the chef this evening. And if the culinary world has any sense, the chef of many evenings to come." There was a pause. Then every single person in that room stood. Chairs scraped against hardwood. Napkins dropped onto laps. Everyone was on their feet, applauding. Sophie stood completely still, her serving spoon still gripped in one hand. She looked at me, eyes wide and shining. I nodded encouragement. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they didn't come from pain. They came from something she'd never felt before from these people. Recognition. Someone pulled out a grocery store sheet cake. Clearly a backup plan, but the room insisted Sophie present her chocolate sculpture. It was breathtaking. Geometric perfection with edible gold accents. She carefully portioned it, and as she distributed pieces, people asked for seconds, thirds. A little boy from down the street tugged her sleeve. "Can you cook my mom's birthday dinner?" Sophie laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound. For the first time all evening, she looked like herself. Not diminished, not invisible, but radiant with purpose. When the last guest left around midnight, she collapsed onto the couch, chef's coat stained, hair falling out of its ponytail, eyes absolutely glowing. She didn't speak for a long moment, just leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "I think I finally cooked for people who actually saw me." And I whispered back, "You always cooked for people who should have seen you. Tonight, you found people who were willing to look." It was nearly 3 in the morning. The house had finally settled into silence. Most of the chocolate sculpture was in the fridge, and the last wine glasses were drying on the rack. I was humming something tuneless, allowing myself to feel a small fragment of peace. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch, chef's coat still on, hands curled like she was still holding her piping bag. Then came the pounding. Not a knock, a series of aggressive strikes against the front door. I froze. That particular silence before confrontation, it has texture, like the air itself holds its breath. I dried my hands and looked through the peephole. There they were. My parents are standing on the porch in matching rain jackets, rigid with fury like extras in a crime drama. And slightly behind them, arms crossed in her signature accusatory stance, was my brother Marcus. I opened the door, but didn't smile and definitely didn't step aside. "You need to retract everything," my father said, skipping any greeting. Immediately, my mother moved forward. "Do you understand what you've done to this family's reputation?" Marcus hadn't spoken yet. He was saving his voice for maximum effect. I blinked slowly. What have I done? They didn't wait for permission. They pushed past me into my entryway, into my home, like they still owned some piece of it. "You let that journalist write a hit piece about us?" my mother snapped. "How dare you allow that article to be published?" "I didn't allow anything," I said, keeping my arms crossed. "A journalist came. She tasted Sophie's food. She asked what happened, and she wrote the truth." My father pointed his finger at my face. "You think this is acceptable? Everyone at the club saw it. Our neighbors read it. My golf partners won't even return my texts." I raised one eyebrow. Sounds devastating. That's when Marcus stepped forward, using his calm corporate voice. "You need to issue a public statement," he said. "Clarify that the article exaggerated things. Say it was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated slowly. "Did someone hack your phone and send that group text? Did I imagine the $1,400 charge on my business card? Did Sophie hallucinate the photos of all of you laughing over expensive steaks while she stood here with food? She'd spent 5 days preparing." My mother's voice cracked with false emotion. She made us look like terrible people. I didn't raise my voice. The quiet made it more powerful. "No," I said carefully. "You did that entirely on your own. She just cooked. You're the ones who chose cruelty." The shouting escalated. They weren't talking to me anymore, just at me, around me, through me. "She humiliated this family. She's ungrateful. She weaponized social media." And then came the line that ignited something dangerous. In me. My mother turned toward the hallway where Sophie had quietly appeared, sleepy and confused. "You should be ashamed," she said directly to my daughter. "After everything we've done for this family," one moment I was near the doorway. The next I was standing between them and Sophie. My body a wall, voice like steel. Step away from my child Neth. That's when my wife appeared. She'd been out returning borrowed chairs to neighbors. She didn't ask questions. She just assessed their faces, saw Sophie's expression, and stepped in beside me like a sentinel. "You need to leave," she said calmly. My father scoffed. "This is family business." "No," my wife replied evenly. "This is our home. You came here at 3 in the morning to scream at an 18-year-old girl who made you dinner out of love? You don't get to wound her twice. Not today. Not in our house. Not ever again." She didn't shout. She didn't waver. And somehow that made it even more absolute. They stood there for a moment, fury collapsing into indignation. Then Marcus muttered something about legal counsel and stormed toward the door. My parents followed. The door slammed. Silence. Behind me, Sophie was still standing there, but I could hear her breathing more steadily now. Then she said softly, "Mom, look outside." I turned. Across the street, Daniel, the neighbor who moderates the local community Facebook page, stood on his lawn, phone raised, still recording. By noon the next day, the video had exploded across local social media. The title read, "Family from Viral Teen Chef Story Shows Up at Her House to Berate Her." It had been shared over 4,000 times in 8 hours. The comments came faster than I could process. "Who screams at a teenager over a dinner party? That girl deserves so much better than this. This is exactly why people cut off toxic families. If my daughter could cook like that, I'd be showing her off everywhere." I scrolled through them with one hand while making Sophie's favorite tea with the other. She was still curled on the couch, emotionally depleted, barely awake. Her chef's coat was gone, but her hair still smelled faintly like vanilla extract and fresh rosemary. Before I blocked them, I saw the last messages from my parents. "You've destroyed us." We're consulting our attorney about defamation. This is elder abuse and we will pursue legal action. Elder abuse. Because I stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. I didn't respond. I blocked all three. My father, my mother, and Marcus. Deleted the entire group chat. They used for control. Then I did one more thing. I removed and canceled the credit card they'd somehow gotten access to. That particular betrayal would never happen again. Instead of engaging with their accusations online, I posted a single statement. We stand by the truth of what happened and we're finished protecting people who hurt our daughter. I expected backlash, maybe threats. What I received was overwhelming support. Friends from graduate school I hadn't heard from in a decade sent messages of solidarity. A chef from a small Italian restaurant downtown emailed Sophie directly, inviting her to stage in their kitchen during summer break. A recruiter from the International Culinary Institute in Boulder, the exact program Sophie dreamed about, left. A comment under Melissa's article, "We've been made aware of Sophie's talent. We'll be following her journey with great interest." Sophie didn't react much at first. She just stared at the screen, rereading that comment like it might disappear. If she looked away, then she whispered, "They actually saw me." And that shattered something in me. Not in the way I'd been broken before, small and silent and invisible, but in the way you break when something impossibly good becomes real. When all the pain and rejection and buried grief suddenly becomes fertile soil for something better. We didn't celebrate? Not yet. But we could finally breathe.